Hopefully the mic works. Since we're going to do this live.
Doing it live.
And I have not told Jason what we're talking about today. I probably should have flipped the camera on. We'll do it next time. Since we're doing this, we're winging it. Okay, welcome back. Today, I want to kind of cover something that really just kind of jumped in my head the other day when I was watching a client kind of do some post workout work. And then we'll probably get off on some tangents as well. But I want to talk a little bit about the idea of like progression, but more so in not like telling you what to do to progress, but more so like, okay, as coaches, like how are we watching to see if somebody is doing the things that they probably should be doing to progress, or if somebody comes to us with a goal, kind of how do we approach that, from the angle of like, okay, are you a beginner? Are you experienced? Is this a, like, are you chasing a record, or is this just a, personal goal, that kind of thing. So to start it off, um, I didn't tell Jason any of what we're going to talk about today so that he can't prepare. But if I came to you and I was brand new to training, never lifted a weight in my life, what's something that you might tell that person that you wouldn't tell somebody that has a ton of experience that came to you to start training? Just in terms of like what to expect from a progression standpoint, or like, what's something that they need to do as a new client to make progress? I threw you right under the bus.
Right under the bus.
Don't overthink it either, because these are the things that we do instinctively all day. Like somebody comes in, they have this, problem, and we're going to help them solve that problem. And so we just kind of do it instinctively and kind of go with the flow. But when you have a, camera in front of your face, it can be a little harder.
Panic. Just being very wary of a ton of extra volume. And, well, with that, just making sure that you are moving well first before, you add in weight or reps or whatever else it might be. But then kind of, progressing it into that is if you, get the hang of a movement, don't go home and do a million reps of that movement to really, iron it out, so to say. But, I think we're both thinking of the same.
A certain instance, yes, a certain instance where that happened, where basically, I'm gonna put my 2 pennies in,
Mm-hmm.
So what Jason is saying, this is what we preach to all our clients, is like, somebody comes in, if they're brand new to training, they need to learn the movements first and worry less about what the numbers say, how many you're doing, how the workout feels in terms of like, did I go hard enough? That was something just recently I talked to somebody about. They're like, I feel like I didn't go hard enough. I'm like, honestly, it's kind of like I said in my blog. It should feel really easy when you're first starting out. Now, somebody who has all those skills, it's a little bit different. But, we've had instances in the past where somebody comes in, maybe they got a busted squat or whatever. Maybe they've had a history of knee pain, and then we fix their squat, and all of a sudden they don't have knee pain squatting anymore. And then after a couple of weeks, they come back and they're like, "Hey, my knee's really bugging me." And we're kind of looking at it like, well, we squatted on Monday and it's Thursday. Like, did you feel something during the workout or whatever? And in one particular instance, this client told us that they were going home and they were practicing their squat because it had felt so good and it hadn't felt good in years, that they were doing upwards in what, like 200 or 300 a day,
something
to practice the squat.
Something
And I mean, it was like an excessive amount. And even if you have a great squat, you go from doing, none to hundreds a day. Like even the most elite person could have some problems with that. Yeah. So, well, it's kind of like me getting back into it now after, doing 6 months of just cardio.
Yeah.
Like I started with an empty bar because I knew what was coming.
Yeah.
But it was cool to see those, those things start to feel a little bit better. But like, okay, so let's conversely, you've worked with a few high school athletes, this summer. If somebody comes to you, and I'm going to go off on a tangent here in a second, but if somebody comes to you and says, I've got this young athlete, he's going to come in and train all summer. He's got some potential to play maybe in college, regardless of the sport. how are you going to approach that differently than somebody who's even just an average exerciser?
Um, so, well, I don't know if this is going to translate exactly, but um, to with that, that's where you get to like, for us, get to have a little bit more fun in the sense of you may, you'll be more likely to be able to introduce more, not really, not exotic, more challenging movements. More dynamic movements, more explosive movements, focusing again, making sure obviously their bases are well rounded, but being able to incorporate again more dynamic, more explosive, whether it's like single leg work or single single leg work or just more explosive core work, like instead of like a seated med ball rotator, it can be a gather and toss into the wall or anything like that. But just kind of being able to turn into more, not specificity, that isn't really the appropriate term for athletics, but being able to incorporate more challenging movements as opposed
Or
to,
even doing like something dynamic
yeah,
in nature versus like more of a slow and controlled.
yeah,
Like we tell our the average Joe that comes in that just wants to feel better, get a little stronger, maybe lose a little bit of weight, gain a little muscle. We want slow and controlled movements, right?
yeah,
But with an athlete, you got to be able to move fast, and basically the definition of power is how much force can you move over time, and
yeah,
so the more weight you can move fast, the better.
mhm,
So like yeah, when you're talking about like progression for an athlete, even a young athlete, and this is the tangent I'm going to get off on. I've had a number of parents over the years with kids as young as 7 or 8 years old that will message me or call or stop in and say, hey, my kid's an aspiring athlete in X sport, and they need to be faster. Like, but when you're between 7 and 12, probably maybe even 13 for boys, there's a massive difference in coordination and just genetics and athletic performance. So I often tell them, and I think my next one is here right now, so I may have to edit this out. But I often tell them like essentially we want them to be able to learn the movements before applying specific force patterns,
mhm,
like running, jumping, those kind of things are all fine. But trying to teach a kid who's young how to do a kettlebell swing or a hang clean, it's like putting the cart before the horse.
mhm,
I'll often tell those parents like take them outside, have them sprint down the street, have them walk back, do that 3 times, and then 2 days later have them do it 4 times, and then 3 days later, 2 days later have them do it 5 times.
mhm,
And that sprinting and that learning to accelerate and do that stuff can be just as effective as hiring a personal trainer and trying to teach them very specific movements at 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old.
yeah.
So when we do that, that's why we want to make sure that when they're young. And I keep looking outside because we have people walking by, but um, so
I can't see it. I'm
yeah,
blocked by
you're
the
blocked
desk.
by the desk. But um, so that's something that whenever somebody comes into me. Now that being said, I've had some clients that have had some athletes that are now grown up and are either juniors, seniors, or even in college that they were working out with their parents
Mhm,
at 9 or 10 years old, but they've been exposed to it, they've been around it, they've been in the gym, they've
mhm,
worked out at home, they've learned the movements, and they can apply them. And so that's different than if somebody comes in and maybe their experience with athletics is very minimal.
mhm,
And even if they do carry a bit of little extra body weight, oftentimes, like as long as they move and they stay active and they eat some generally decent food, as they progress in age,
yeah.
they'll kind of grow out of that. So that's why, like progression, when we talk about progression, if I back up a little bit and say, well, progression is basically just being able to do more or working closer toward your goal
Yeah.
than farther away from your goal. Now, if a new client comes in and they ask how many days a week they should work out, what's the first thing you tell them? It's a completely trick
Whatever.
question.
Like honestly, it's case by case basis, but like I usually tell people just to kind of feel it out. Like one is good, two is gooder, three is gooder, or I mean, it just kind of depends. Now, generally, if someone is like brand new, like haven't worked out a day in their life, whether it's if they're going, 3 days a week, I tend I tend to kind of like think that's about the bar to where we can still kind of control their volume to where they can get their work in and then be able to recover and then maybe take a day in between, maybe like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday type of scenario. Um, but there again, it just kind of depends on the person because you might have someone that just moves and recovers well to where they may not have been active, but it just clicks and they feel like, well, not they can potentially handle more to where that's where it gets a little tricky because you still want to kind of hold the reins a little bit and don't have them just cannonball into the deep end. But it varies. Generally, my 2 cents is like 2 to 3 times a week for the first couple or few weeks, kind of see how that feels, and then if it's feeling more doable or less you're less beat up in between or less exhausted in between, then we can look at having you come in another day or maybe planning in a different, like instead of Monday, Wednesday, Friday, maybe you go Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and then like an optional Friday or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you basically hit almost everything I would say. Like, as a blanket, I tell people you can only progress as fast as you recover.
Mm-hmm.
So, like you said, if somebody's brand new, never lifted a day in their life, now if they're doing one-on-one training, in theory, we could train them 5 days a week because we can also do mobility, we can do cardio, we can do other stuff. If they're doing our group training, we would typically say, I'd say the same thing. I'd say, let's try for 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
At a certain point, that's the next thing we're going to talk about is when do you start to do more. Um, and I always say, like, soreness is not a gauge of whether or not it's a good workout.
Mm-hmm.
I've had workouts where I get done and I feel like I didn't do anything and I'm sore. And then
Mm-hmm.
I've had workouts where I'm toast and I'm not sore.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean you're not progressing,
Yeah.
And again, like, progression is only measured by, like, kind of what you're either measuring. So if I'm progressing on my bench press, I can either do more reps at the same weight or I can do more weight at the same reps.
Yeah.
Right? Did I say that right?
I think so.
Something like that. Yeah. Now, if it's cardio or if it's conditioning, it might be okay. Well, I can do more work in the same amount of time, or I can basically increase my speed or pace, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's other progression where it's like weight loss, muscle gain, those kind of things. We have an InBody for that, which we're going to have some exciting, things coming up with the InBody here this fall. But really, what sparked this kind of idea for me was I have a number of clients that will kind of stick around and do like extra arms work. I program bonus work, probably 3 of the 5 days a week, but and then we do that for 4 consecutive weeks usually. So if somebody comes in and they, let's say they grab a pair of dumbbells and they start pumping out some bicep curls. Again, I'm going to throw you under the bus here. If somebody comes and says, I want to have, like, more toned arms,
Mm-hmm.
what's something you say to them? I know what I'd say.
Let's start with like just ask them what they're doing right now, and it's kind of a not a not a cop out, but even like to be able to get them to just kind of quantify what they're doing right now would be kind of the first step because you can't progress on what you don't track necessarily. Like if you just come in and go kind of willy nilly and just do okay, maybe this day I do 30s for however many reps feel good. Well, however many reps feel good Tuesday might be different than next Tuesday or the next time you do arms. But um, so I mean, I just would like to get kind of a baseline of what they're doing, and then from there, we can talk about like their definition of tone, whether that being more mass or more vascularity.
This is where we're gonna have a little fun.
Okay.
We haven't done this yet. So what I tell people when they say toned, again, you may not agree with this. I tell them it doesn't exist.
Okay.
Okay, but
Yeah.
we're gonna get back to that because in order to have toned muscle, you have to have muscle mass, right?
Yeah.
Like if you don't have muscle in your arms, no matter how lean you are, it's not going to protrude through the skin. If I don't have a tricep, so to have to to a degree, they got to build muscle. Okay, but that doesn't mean that they can't try to, look
Yeah.
toned because that's been a term forever.
Yeah.
Now, what I tell people, and I like what you're saying because you do need progression, you
Yeah.
do need an idea, but I treat arms a little different than I would bench or squat or whatever because there's less risk, right? As long as you're not just going overboard. Arms is weird because I was just telling a couple this morning that as long as at least one set burns really, really bad to the point where you don't want to do it anymore or you literally can't do it anymore. Because, like with curls, unless you're doing anything under probably 6 or 8 reps, highly unlikely you're going to injure yourself doing like a set of 12 to 15.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to 1 rep max on a curl, you could definitely blow your biceps out. Don't do that. Don't do a 1 rep max on a curl, especially preacher curls.
Don't do that.
Too many videos. That's another thing. We could start watching videos and doing our reactions. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
So in that sense, if somebody came to me and said, Jared, I want to have, toned arms, and, what should I do? I would say, okay, we'll pick, a weight that you can do between 10 and 20 reps and then go till it hurts so bad you don't want to do it anymore. But that's usually at the end of the workout when they're plenty warm.
Yeah.
If they're not warm and it's an arms day, I'd say do 2 or 3 warm-up sets and then do at least 1 set to fatigue.
Yeah.
I treat arms a little differently because like arms is one of those things where it's like, as long as it burns really bad,
So
it doesn't really matter that much if it was 10 or 11 or 12 reps or if it was 20 or 25. Eventually, you're going to get to that point where it sucks. And like for us, you and I both agree. I feel like I'm going to throw up after doing a terrible set of curls worse than I would doing squats or lunges or split squats. Like, I don't know why, but for some reason, they give me a physical response.
Yeah, pretty terrible.
So, but when I was watching, a couple clients doing some different things, after their workouts, it kind of sparked, this kind of idea of like, okay, well, there's a number of clients that I'd love to tell the same thing. So I was just going to make a video about it, and then I'll follow up with them over the next few weeks. But so like if somebody's wanting to gain something from it, whether they want to have stronger legs, more muscle definition or whatever, the work needs to be hard enough, the volume needs to be enough, and then you need to do it frequently enough, right? That's a very broad way to put it.
Yeah.
But if I do curls 1 time every 2 weeks, I probably can't expect to have cooler looking biceps. Yeah. Same thing if I'm trying to improve my anaerobic conditioning by doing bike sprints, I probably need to do them more than once a month. It doesn't mean it's not effective, but it's not going to be effective to getting me better at that, right?
As effective.
Now, there are certain things that you can do multiple times a week, but that gets into training, and so I'm not going to necessarily go specifically into that. But when it comes to progression, and when it comes to like, okay, how do we approach it? I think that's why, like, having a personal trainer, having a coach, like I was just telling this couple this morning, like I would really love it if like when it came to, just kind of people that come to our gym, I know there are some times where there's questions. I think people feel afraid to ask us, questions about like, hey, how do I get this result? But like just kind of thinking, okay, well, what is it actually going to take for me to make progress in a certain area? Now, I like the jack of all trades, master of none approach, where it's like I just kind of keep myself prepared, so that way if I do decide to do something, I'm ready for it. You know, I may not be great at a lot of things, but I'm good at some things. But when it comes to like like you said, like if it was an athlete, I spoke at a coaches clinic years ago where I told people like, look, if there's a Division I talent, they probably need to train differently than somebody who's just trying to maybe make the varsity team, right? They can probably handle more because if they get to college, there's a good chance they're going to be training 2 to 4 hours a day, plus practice.
Plus
I was looking up for a client one time, just kind of what it took to play at an elite level, even at college, and it was like they're spending 5 to 6 hours, not just training, but doing film and doing other like therapies and things like that. It's a job.
Yeah, it is. It's a full-time job.
And so, like progression. Ultimately, like progression has to be something that you can measure, right? It's got to be something like, now there is like, I feel better, that helps too. Like I've had a number of clients where it's like, I just feel better. So, but doing things consistently enough but I think that's where it comes down to is it's like, whatever you're doing, I was having another conversation with a client this morning about whatever you're doing, like nutrition, for example. Like if I'm going to do something, I need to do it for probably 4 to 8 weeks before I can really reflect on whether or not it's effective. And that's assuming that I'm 80 to 90% compliant or better in that time. Same thing with training. Like if I'm going to run a half marathon, and I'm running 1 day a week, I can't really expect to get better at that. Now we talked about, like you can only progress as fast as you recover. Like we have people in this gym that could probably train 7 days a week,
Yeah.
realistically. I still like a rest day, but they might go out for a jog or something. And then we've got others that they train on Monday and by Thursday, they're just getting over the soreness. That reminds me, we did have a client years ago, and you would know her. She was in her 20s, came to me, never lifted before, and she had just said in kind of our intro session, like, I saw something on TV, and I just wondered how good I would be at that. And she came in. Normally, a client comes in first month, they're dealing with a little bit of soreness. Some days worse than others.
Yeah.
This girl never got sore. I don't think she told me one time in her entire and she was working, and I'll tell you afterwards who I'm talking about. But she was working hard, and every time she did a little more, every time she could do, like, she got to the point where she was doing the bulk of our workouts without too many modifications other than weight. Good technique, good skills. And I don't think one time she ever told me she was sore. Like, believe it or not, that girl probably had the genetics to be an elite athlete and just never was exposed to sports.
Wild.
Like, crazy. And when I tell you, you're going to go, oh my gosh, yes, totally. But otherwise, yeah. So progression, again, it's just one of those things that if you're going to take anything from this video aside from just some ramblings, you got to start, right? And if progression for you is going from 1 day a week to 2, that's progression. That's quantifiable, right?
100%.
Or if it's 2 days a week for 30 minutes, maybe you do 2 days a week for 45 minutes. Again, that's progression, right? If you set a goal, like I want to be able to do a pull-up, well, what's that look like realistically? If you're 50 pounds overweight and you're a female, like that might be 5 years realistically, because you're going to have to lose some weight, you're going to have to gain some strength. Pull-ups are hard. Like I was just talking to somebody yesterday about how it's the holy grail for a lot of people. Like to be able to do one pull-up, is a big deal. Right?
Monty Python.
Yes. So yeah, it's just progression is one of those things. And again, if you're not